No one noticed the moment it began. That was the most disturbing part, when an entire community slowly disappeared. There was no scream loud enough for the nation to hear. What follows is not the story of a single person, but of dozens of families, neighbors, and strangers who once shared the same streets, and then were erased from them. And the question that still lingers is simple. How does a place vanish without leaving a trace? In the early 1970s, tucked between two ordinary American states, there existed a settlement that appeared unremarkable in every official document. It had a name, it had a zip code, it even had a population count that changed every few years, just enough to look normal. Yet today, no map openly acknowledges it, and no federal archive lists it as anything more than an administrative error. Residents remembered it differently. They remembered the sound of gravel beneath tires at dawn, the low hum of factory equipment in the distance, and the smell of pine mixed with industrial smoke hanging in the air. Children rode bicycles down wide, clean streets. Neighbors waved. Life, at least on the surface, followed the rhythm of the American dream. But why did so many former residents later say the same thing? That something always felt off? The town was built fast, too fast. Construction records showed entire residential blocks appearing in less than a year. Utilities were installed before permits were officially approved. Schools opened with modern equipment, yet no local school board elections were ever held. Doctors worked in the clinic, but none stayed longer than 2 years. People noticed, but they didn't question it. In the 1970s, jobs were scarce in many places, and this town offered stability. Paychecks arrived on time. Mortgages were affordable. Silence, it seemed, was part of the agreement. Still, late at night, some residents reported hearing trucks moving through the outskirts of town, heavy vehicles unmarked, always after midnight. They never stopped. They never asked for directions, and they were never acknowledged in the morning. What were they transporting, and why only at night? Every new resident received the same welcome packet. Inside were standard documents, local rules, emergency procedures, community guidelines. But there was also something else, a thin, unsigned pamphlet that encouraged participation in community wellness initiatives. Attendance technically was voluntary. In practice, those who skipped too many sessions noticed changes. Their job assignments shifted. Their children were moved to different classrooms. Medical appointments were delayed without explanation. No one was ever threatened outright. That was the brilliance of it. Fear didn't arrive as violence, it arrived as inconvenience. Why did cooperation feel less like a choice and more like survival? By 1972, nearly everyone in town was participating in some form of program. Group discussions, stress tests, behavioral surveys that asked oddly specific questions about dreams, fears, and childhood memories. People were told the data would help improve public health outcomes. The rooms were always too bright. The chairs were arranged in perfect circles, and there was always a faint buzzing sound. Electrical, constant, impossible to locate. Some residents later described a pressure behind their eyes during these sessions, a dull ache that lingered long after they returned home. Others reported vivid dreams the same night, memories that didn't feel like their own. If this was wellness, why did it leave so many people exhausted and afraid? Children were the first to change. Teachers noticed it before parents did. Students who once struggled began excelling overnight. Others withdrew completely, staring at their desks as if listening to voices no one else could hear. Playground laughter grew quieter. Eye contact became rare. Parents were reassured. Development, they were told, was uneven. This was normal. This was progress. But at dinner tables across the town, families sat in silence, listening to the ticking of clocks grow louder than conversation. Evenings felt heavier, as if the air itself had learned to wait. What kind of experiment requires the patience of an entire town? By the mid-1970s, people started leaving. At least that's what the official explanation would later say. Records showed relocation requests, job transfers, voluntary departures. But neighbors remembered something else entirely. They remembered houses being occupied one week and empty the next. Furniture still inside, cars still parked, pets left behind, mail piled up, lawns went unmowed, and no for sale signs ever appeared. When questions were asked, answers came quickly and vaguely. Federal reassignment, family emergencies, confidential matters. Why did every explanation sound rehearsed? One night, during a sudden power outage, the town experienced something it never forgot. Without the constant hum of electricity, the silence became unbearable. Dogs howled, infants cried without stopping, and somewhere beyond the tree line, a deep mechanical sound echoed. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Those awake at the time described the same sensation. A feeling of being watched. Not by people, but by something distant and calculating. Something that had been there all along. When the lights returned, everything looked the same. But no one slept again that night. What had been hidden by the noise? By 1977, the town was shrinking. Not just in population, but in presence. Businesses closed without announcements. The school merged grades due to low enrollment. Community events were cancelled indefinitely. And then quietly, the town stopped appearing in regional planning documents. It didn't happen all at once. One year it was missing from a map. Another year from a budget report. Eventually, it was as if the town had never been acknowledged at all. How does a community fade without a single official goodbye? Years later, when journalists and researchers attempted to investigate, they encountered the same obstacle repeatedly. Incomplete files, redacted pages, missing microfilm reels, witnesses who remembered everything or nothing at all. Some former residents refused to speak. Others broke down mid-sentence, overcome by emotions they couldn't explain. A few claimed they still heard the buzzing sound in their dreams. And all of them asked the same question, in one form or another. Why us? But the most unsettling discovery came decades later. Buried inside a declassified federal index, an entry referencing a population-level behavioral feasibility project, marked as inconclusive. No location listed, no participants named, no results published, just a note in the margin written by hand. Termination incomplete, long-term effects unknown. What exactly had been terminated, and what had escaped with the people who survived? For a long time, the people believed they were being studied. They were wrong. By the time they realized they were being shaped, it was already too late. What began as observation slowly transformed into something far more invasive, raising a question that would haunt survivors for decades. When does research stop being science and start becoming control? The wellness sessions changed without warning. What had once felt like guided conversations now followed rigid scripts. Questions were repeated verbatim across different groups. Facial expressions were noted. Pauses were timed. Silence itself became data. Participants noticed the smell first, a sterile blend of disinfectant and heated metal. The air felt thicker in those rooms, pressing against the chest. Lights buzzed louder than before, flickering just enough to strain the eyes. No one explained the changes. No one asked if consent still mattered. Why did the town keep showing up, even when every instinct told them not to? Outside the sessions, life narrowed. Jobs became more specialized, more repetitive. Residents were reassigned tasks without explanation, often isolated from co-workers they had known for years. Social circles collapsed inward, shrinking to immediate households. Neighbors still waved, but eye contact faded quickly. Conversations ended abruptly when unfamiliar footsteps approached. The community didn't fracture all at once. It segmented, quietly and efficiently. Fear didn't need to announce itself. It only needed to be predictable. Who benefits when a community stops talking to itself? Children were no longer just participants. They were priorities. New educational programs were introduced, replacing standard curricula with experimental methods that emphasized emotional regulation, obedience, and delayed gratification. Creativity was tolerated only when it followed rules. Teachers reported receiving instructions they didn't fully understand. Parents noticed their children correcting each other's language, repeating phrases that sounded rehearsed. At night, some children sat upright in bed, eyes open, whispering responses to questions no one had asked. What kind of future was being rehearsed inside their minds? By 1974, health complaints became impossible to ignore. Headaches, memory gaps, sudden emotional detachment. People struggled to recall recent conversations yet vividly remembered events from years before. Medical staff documented symptoms meticulously, but treatment plans never changed. Those who pushed for outside opinions found their requests stalled indefinitely. Referrals were lost, phone calls went unanswered, travel approvals were delayed without reason. The message was subtle but clear. Help existed only inside the system. What happens when the system is the source of the illness? Rehooks appeared everywhere, embedded in routine. Town meetings opened with reminders about unity. Radio broadcasts emphasized trust. Posters encouraged participation with phrases like, "Your mind matters," and "Progress requires patience." The repetition worked. Slowly, doubt began to feel like betrayal. People stopped asking why. They started asking how to endure. At what point does survival replace resistance? One winter evening, a group failed to return from a session. No alarms sounded. No announcements were made. Their absence was first noticed at dinner tables, then at workplaces, then at school, drop-offs where children waited for parents who never arrived. By morning, official explanations were already circulating. Emergency relocations, confidential reassignment, necessary interventions, but their homes told a different story. Meals half prepared, shoes by the door, lights left on in empty rooms. The silence inside those houses felt heavier than grief. If relocation was voluntary, why did it leave such disorder behind? That night, the trucks returned, closer this time. Residents described the vibration before the sound. Windows rattled, floors hummed. From behind curtains, they watched shadowed vehicles move with purpose. Unhurried, escorted by no local authorities, the air smelled of fuel and damp earth. Somewhere, metal clanged against metal, followed by a low mechanical whine that lasted far too long. No one filmed it. No one intervened. What does a town become when fear replaces witness? By the following year, resistance began to surface, not loudly but emotionally. People cried without knowing why. Others felt nothing at all. Relationships dissolved under the strain of unspoken terror. Some residents became hyper-compliant, desperate to avoid attention. Others withdrew entirely, hoping invisibility might protect them. The experiment, whatever its original intent, was no longer measuring behavior. It was rewriting it, and the town felt it. Were these changes accidental, or exactly what had been planned? The first confirmed death occurred quietly. No public announcement, no funeral, just a brief notice of medical complications and a sealed house by sunset. Those who had attended sessions with the deceased noticed something chilling. His last recorded responses had been marked as unstable. The implication was impossible to ignore. Non-compliance had consequences. How many more warnings would the town endure before it broke? By 1976, the community no longer functioned as a whole. It existed as monitored units. Families tracked. Behavior scored, reactions evaluated. Trust evaporated. Every word felt measured. Every emotion potentially incriminating. Yet still, participation remained nearly universal. Not because people believed in the program, but because leaving had become unimaginable. If escape was never an option, what was the experiment truly testing? As winter deepened, a rumor spread, softly, dangerously. Somewhere beneath the town, beneath the clinics and meeting rooms, there were levels no resident had ever been meant to see. Rooms without windows, equipment never listed in inventories, data that wasn't just recorded, but fed back into the population. No one could confirm it, no one could dismiss it. And once the idea took hold, the fear became something else entirely. What if the town was no longer the subject, but the mechanism? By the time fear became visible, trust was already gone. Not because the people stopped caring about one another, but because caring had become dangerous. This was the phase the documents would later call instability. The residents called it something else entirely. The breaking point. The first fracture appeared inside families. Husbands and wives stopped sharing thoughts. Parents filtered every word spoken near their children. Bedrooms turned into private interrogation rooms where even whispered doubts felt reckless. Some spouses began attending sessions separately, assigned that way, without explanation. They returned home changed, responding to the same questions with different answers, as if rehearsed by unseen hands. Love survived, but honesty did not. What kind of system forces intimacy to become a liability? Betrayal did not arrive with accusation, it arrived with compliance. Residents noticed that those who followed instructions without hesitation received subtle privileges, shorter sessions, preferred work assignments, medical appointments that actually happened. No one announced the reward structure. It revealed itself through absence, of pain, of delay, of attention. People began watching each other closely, not out of malice, but calculation. If survival required obedience, who could afford to resist? The sensory changes intensified. The buzzing sound grew louder, lower in pitch, vibrating through walls and bones alike. The air in meeting rooms felt damp and metallic, leaving a bitter taste on the tongue. Some residents complained their skin felt warm during sessions, as if standing too close to unseen machinery. Sleep became fragmented, dreams bled into waking hours. People woke convinced they had already answered questions that had not yet been asked. When reality starts to blur, where does accountability go? A quiet group began to form. Not rebels, not heroes, just people who remembered what normal once felt like. They didn't meet openly. They passed notes in library books. They lingered at grocery shelves longer than necessary. Eye contact lasted a second too long, heavy with meaning. Their goal was modest, confirmation. Was anyone else experiencing the same symptoms? Was anyone else afraid? When the answer came back yes, it brought comfort and terror. If they were not alone, how closely were they being watched? The first open act of defiance was almost invisible. A resident missed a scheduled session. No explanation, no emergency, just absence. The response was immediate. Work access was revoked, medical care suspended. Their children were reassigned to separate educational tracks. Within days, the family became isolated, avoided not out of cruelty, but fear of association. Then one night, their house went dark. By morning, it was empty. What lesson had the town just been forced to learn? Grief became communal and unspoken. People mourned in silence, afraid that visible sadness might be flagged as instability. Tears were shed in bathrooms, in cars, under running water to mask the sound. Children sensed the tension. They became quieter, more observant. Some took on protective roles, correcting parents, reminding them of rules, urging caution. When children begin managing fear for adults, what has already been lost? The underground rumors returned, sharper now. A maintenance worker had seen an elevator that didn't appear on any blueprint. A janitor overheard conversations about feedback loops and behavioral reinforcement. Medical staff whispered about data streams that didn't end at charts, but at control panels. No one could prove it. No one could stop believing it. The town no longer felt like a test subject. It felt like an engine, and engines require fuel. Who or what was being consumed? The second death was different. This time, the body was returned. Officially, it was a heart failure, but those who saw him noticed burn-like marks along the temples, faint but unmistakable. The clinic offered no explanation. The house was sealed anyway. At the session the following day, the facilitator's voice never wavered. Emotional reactions will be noted, they said calmly. When grief itself becomes data, what remains human? By now, people understood the unspoken truth. Someone inside the town was reporting. Not a single informant, but many. Not always willingly. The system didn't need loyalty. It needed participation. People betrayed each other by following instructions, by answering honestly, by surviving. And every betrayal made the next one easier. How long can a community endure when survival demands its own erosion? A plan formed, not to escape, but to disrupt. A small group believed that if the system relied on behavioral consistency, unpredictability could expose it. Missed cues, conflicting responses, emotional noise. It was dangerous, it was desperate, and for the first time in years, it felt like choice. But if the system was adaptive, what would it do when challenged? The night they acted, the town felt different. The buzzing spiked, then cut out entirely. Lights flickered, dogs barked in unison. Somewhere beneath the streets, machinery shifted, heavy and irritated. People held their breath, waiting. What came next would decide whether the town still belonged to its residents or to something else entirely. The system did not panic. That was the final confirmation. When the town broke its pattern, when responses conflicted and behavior fractured, there was no chaos, only adjustment. And in that calm reaction, the residents understood something far more terrifying than failure. This had always been the endgame. The disruption lasted less than an hour. Lights flickered, then stabilized. The buzzing returned, deeper now, almost subsonic, vibrating through walls and ribs alike. People felt it in their teeth, behind their eyes, in the softest parts of the body where fear settles first. Then came the announcements. Not alarms, not warnings, instructions. Residents were told to remain indoors. Children were excused from school indefinitely. Sessions were postponed until further notice. The language was gentle, reassuring. Phenol. Why did safety suddenly sound like goodbye? By morning, the town was surrounded. Not visibly, no barricades, no soldiers, but functionally. Roads were closed for maintenance. Phone lines produced only static. Radios repeated the same calm broadcast on a loop, emphasizing cooperation and rest. The air smelled different. Ozone, wet metal. Something burned, somewhere underground. People stood at windows, watching nothing happen. When control becomes invisible, how do you know where it ends? The first relocation wave began that afternoon. Names were called quietly, one household at a time. Trucks arrived without markings. Doors closed without resistance. Children clutched stuffed animals. Adults carried nothing but documents they were told to bring. Those who remained waited in unbearable silence, listening to engines fade into the distance. No one cried out. No one protested. What does consent mean when every alternative has been erased? Inside, the lower levels, places no resident had officially seen, the experiment concluded. Data streams finalized, behavioral arcs assessed, long-term projections logged. Whatever the town had become, it was no longer required in physical form. The language used later would be clinical. Population-level feasibility confirmed. The reality was simpler. The town had served its purpose, and purposes once fulfilled are discarded. Who decides when a community is no longer useful? Some residents were released, not home. There was no home left, but into other towns, other lives, other systems. They were given new addresses, new jobs, new narratives. They were told they had volunteered. They were told they would forget. Most of them did, but forgetting was never complete. Why did certain memories resist erasure? Others were never seen again. Official records listed them as relocated, reassigned, transferred. But no secondary documentation followed. No employment history. No death certificates, just silence. Families were separated. Names were scrubbed from databases. Photographs disappeared from public archives. It was not destruction. It was subtraction. How do you mourn someone the world insists never existed? Years passed. The land where the town once stood was reclaimed quietly. Buildings dismantled. Roads buried. Trees planted in precise rows, young enough to look natural, old enough to conceal. From above it appeared untouched. From below, remnants remained, foundations, cables, sealed chambers humming long after power was supposedly cut. What lingers when the surface looks clean? Decades later, fragments surfaced. A mislabeled box in a federal archive. A declassified index with missing pages. Testimonies from people who couldn't fully explain what they remembered, only how it made them feel. Buzzing in dreams, unexplained aversions to bright rooms, a deep irrational fear of circles. The trauma had outlived the town. Can an experiment truly end if its effects persist? The final document was uncovered by accident. No title, no signature. Just a handwritten note attached to a summary report. Termination incomplete. Population dispersal achieved. Secondary transmission possible. Secondary transmission? Not memory, not trauma. Behavior. If what was learned in that town spread beyond it, through families, through children, through patterns no one could trace, then the experiment had never needed to survive physically. It had already escaped. Today, no official map shows the town. No monument marks its absence. No apology has ever been issued. But sometimes across the country, people describe the same dreams, the same buzzing, the same sense of being observed, not watched, but measured. And the question remains unanswered. If a community can be erased, how many others have already been tested?